It's the season for conferences, and joining us now is Stephen Roach with his thoughts on what's gone by with the market so far. Stephen, thanks very much for joining in. It's been a tumultuous period for global markets. What do you think has led to it, and where are we standing now?
I remain very cautious on the prognosis for the global economy. Having gone through the worst crisis in over 75 years, I think the markets were complacent and overly optimistic in rallying sharply in the final 9 months of 2009 under the presumption that we would have a classic, vigorous, V-shaped recovery. I think the recovery is going to be weak, anemic, fragile, potentially vulnerable to a setback or double dip, and I think that reality is starting to hit home in overly exuberant financial markets.
Morning, Stephen. How are you reading the news from Europe, since you keep an eye on that? And do you think this could blow up to be a big, bad situation or a contagion-like situation, or do you think it's overblown or blown out of proportion?
Well, all major crises have one thing in common. They leave countries, individuals, or businesses with a lot of debt. And so it's not unusual to have a debt-driven shakeout once the worst is over. And I think we're going to see that for some time ahead in some of the riskier sovereign debt markets of Europe. We could see ongoing debt problems for American consumers, and we've certainly seen over 20 years of ongoing debt problems for the post-bubble Japanese economy. So this is not a knee-jerk reaction. This is not idiosyncratic that you can dismiss and pretend it was just a bad dream.
All this has resulted in a wave of risk aversion over the last few days, it seems. Do you see that persisting, this new trend of risk aversion which has cropped up in the last 2 or 3 weeks?
I think, again, risky assets are going to be under periodic pressure, not constant pressure, from time to time over the next several years. The world has benefited over the past year to 15 months from the biggest liquidity injection in world history. And now as the world starts to stabilize, it's incumbent on policymakers, monetary and fiscal alike, to withdraw this liquidity, and that could certainly lead to destabilizing responses in many risky markets.
This weakness has led to a lot of analysis about how the dollar has been appreciating, though, Stephen. Is it a given that if people are taking risk off the table, it will start flowing back into perceived safer assets like the dollar?
I think the liquidity is hard to track dollar for dollar, rupee for rupee. It's in the case of the United States, an awful lot of the liquidity is going to repair the hole in consumer balance sheets. In the case of Europe, a lot of the liquidity is going to repair a battered banking system, which has certainly been the case in the United States as well. It's not as if this liquidity is being injected into markets to boost share prices around the world. There is so much damage that is still lingering from this crisis that the liquidity is being directed at repairing that damage rather than providing a surplus of investable funds for speculators.
From our own markets perspective, though, Stephen, the one eventuality people are not dealing with right now is that 2010 actually turns out to be a year of negative returns for emerging markets. How likely would that scenario be in your eyes?
Well, emerging markets in general and developing Asia in particular had a truly spectacular run from March of 2009 through the end of last year. The region, however, remains heavily dependent on external demand or the rest of the global economy. And if the global economy remains as shaky as I suspect, then I think there could be some weakness to come in Asian economies that is not really factored into equity prices at this point in time. The idea of decoupling, for me, has always been a joke for a region that is the most dependent on the rest of the world to sustain economic activity.
All this turbulence globally has led to some firming up of the dollar, not unexpectedly, and the dollar index is back above 80. Do you see this strength continuing for the dollar in the near term?
Well, I think if we go back into a serious risk aversion mode, we know the answer. The dollar benefits from a flight to safety, a flight to quality. That was certainly the case from March of 08 to March of 09. I don't think we'll go back into that type of serious crisis, but the dollar could certainly benefit from some weakness near term. Longer term, I remain very bearish on the dollar, mainly because of the horrible current account deficit outlook in the United States, which is not going to get any better with America facing $1 trillion budget deficits for as far as the eye can see.